The news of Brandon Blackstock's death at just 48 years old has left many stunned, not just because of the suddenness of the announcement, but also because so few knew the personal battle he was fighting behind the scenes. According to a statement released by his family, Brandon bravely fought cancer for over 3 years, passing away peacefully surrounded by loved ones. Though often recognized as the ex-husband of pop superstar Kelly Clarkson, Brandon's life was much bigger than that headline. He was a father, a manager, a businessman, and someone who lived most of his life outside the public eye until circumstances made him part of celebrity news cycles. With his passing, many are now looking back on who Brandon Blackstock really was, and what kind of life he led before and after the spotlight found him. Born on December 16, 1976 in Fort Worth, Texas, Brandon Blackstock grew up in a family that was deeply connected to the country music industry. His father, Narvel Blackstock, was a prominent talent manager who co-founded Starstruck Entertainment and managed some of the biggest names in the business, including Reba McEntire, who would later become Brandon's stepmother. Being raised in this environment meant Brandon was exposed early on to the inner workings of the entertainment world. But while many kids might have chosen a different path, Brandon seemed naturally drawn to the business side of music. It wasn't about fame for him. It was about relationships, negotiations, and helping artists navigate their careers. As he matured, Brandon followed in his father's footsteps. He became a talent manager and gained a reputation in the industry for being low-key but effective. He wasn't loud, didn't seek out the cameras, and rarely made headlines until much later. One of his most prominent clients was Blake Shelton, the country music superstar and longtime judge on The Voice. Brandon's management was instrumental in helping guide Blake's crossover into mainstream stardom. Through his work in management, Brandon also frequently crossed paths with major industry names, including the woman who would eventually become his wife. Brandon and Kelly Clarkson first met in 2006 at the Academy of Country Music Awards, where he was working as her tour manager. However, they didn't start dating until 2012. When they finally got together, it felt like a fairy tale. For a while. In 2013, the two were married at a romantic ceremony in Tennessee, and not long after, they welcomed 2 children together, a daughter named River Rose and a son named Remington Alexander. Brandon also had 2 older children from a previous marriage, making their home a blended family. During their marriage, Kelly often spoke publicly about how grounded Brandon made her feel, especially as someone constantly in the media spotlight. She said he was her rock, her best friend, and someone who helped her find balance in the chaos of fame. Brandon, meanwhile, seemed to enjoy taking a back seat to the attention. He managed Kelly's career for a period, and they worked closely on her music and television appearances. On the outside, everything seemed ideal, a power couple blending music, family, and business. But things began to change behind the scenes. In 2020, Kelly Clarkson filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. What followed was a highly public and often contentious legal battle. Issues over property, spousal support, child custody, and business entanglements made headlines for months. Kelly claimed that Brandon, who had managed her through Starstruck Management, had overstepped and improperly charged her for services. Brandon, in turn, argued he deserved compensation for the role he played in her career. The court eventually sided with Kelly on many points, and the divorce was finalized in 2022. This chapter of Brandon's life painted him in a complicated light. To some, he appeared opportunistic, someone who benefited financially from his proximity to fame. To others, he was a man going through a brutal and public split, trying to protect his role as a father and secure a future for himself. No matter how people viewed the divorce, one thing remained clear. Brandon deeply loved his children and continued to be present in their lives, despite the separation and legal wrangling. In the years following the divorce, Brandon kept a low profile. He reportedly stepped back from talent management and moved to Montana, where he enjoyed a quieter, more rural lifestyle. Montana had always held a special place for him and Kelly during their marriage, and even after the divorce, Brandon stayed connected to the land, the space, and the simplicity that life there provided. He seemed to be looking for a reset, a way to heal, reflect, and rebuild away from Hollywood headlines and court battles. What many didn't know during this time was that Brandon was fighting a much deeper battle, one that wasn't splashed across gossip columns or covered in legal documents. He had been diagnosed with cancer, and for over 3 years, he fought silently and privately. Those closest to him have said he faced the illness with immense strength and dignity, never wanting pity or attention. He remained focused on his family, especially his children, and tried to make the most of the time he had. His passing came as a shock to many. Because he had kept his illness out of the public eye, fans, friends, and even some colleagues had no idea he was sick. When the news broke that he had died after a years-long battle with cancer, the reaction was one of sadness, but also a reevaluation of who Brandon Blackstock really was. Not just as someone tied to celebrity culture, but as a human being who lived, worked, loved, and ultimately faced the end with quiet bravery. In the end, Brandon's legacy is more than the sum of his public controversies. He was a man shaped by the entertainment world, yes, but he was also someone who tried to find balance within it. He helped build careers, raised 4 children, and managed to remain largely out of the limelight despite being linked to one of the biggest pop stars in the world. His story is one of ambition, love, mistakes, reinvention, and resilience. Brandon Blackstock leaves behind a complex but deeply human legacy. He will be remembered by his family, his friends, his children, and those who knew the man beyond the headlines. He lived a life that, while at times messy and misunderstood, was filled with real relationships, quiet contributions, and battles most people never saw. And now in death, he has found the peace that perhaps eluded him in the final years of his life.